Hello and welcome to The Queer Gaze, a gay movie podcast dedicated to examining queer representation and issues.
We're continuing our cruising theme with writer-director William Friedkin's Cruising. And if you want to hear more of the discussion, including our Chili Pepper Award, please support the show at patreon.com/thequeergaze.
You'll also get early access to regular main feed episodes and extra content for every single episode.
And you can follow us on social media at The Queer Gaze.
Well, Joe, I think it was inevitable, if we were doing the cruising theme, that we would have to do the granddaddy of them all.
Truly, how could you get away with it if you didn't talk about cruising? I mean, look, I'm wearing my leather jacket because I'm ready to go.
I was going to say it's very impressive. I would have joined you too if I owned a leather jacket, but sadly I do not.
Okay. Well, you are a friend to animals and I am not, clearly.
And I have never cruised.
Okay. Yeah. Well, so you are not like Al Pacino in this movie then. So this is a movie from 1980, written and directed, as I mentioned, by Mr. William Friedkin, he of the very diverse filmography. So let's do The Exorcist. Let's do this. Let's do Bug, the hallucinatory kind of war movie with Ashley Judd that's very, very upsetting. So I like his diversity, but in this film, we have Al Pacino playing Steve Burns. He is a relatively low-level New York City police officer who ends up getting tapped by Captain Edelson, who is Paul Sorvino, to go undercover in the gay parts of New York because there is a serial killer on the prowl. So gay men, particularly from the leather S&M culture, have been turning up with very serrated knife wounds in their backs. And so we need to get somebody in there because it is an election year, Conrad. So we need to catch this killer toot sweet. And this requires poor Steve Burns to figure out, hey, do I like leather? Do I like men? Or should we just intersperse little moments throughout the film where I fuck my girlfriend, Nancy Gates, who is played by Karen Allen, and then we end ambiguously after maybe catching the killer, or maybe it was Steve Burns all along. Question for you, because this is a first-time watch for you. Did you really suspect Steve Burns as being the killer? Do you see that as the end of the film?
No, I don't.
No, I don't either.
Because despite all of the window dressing and screwing around with different actors and ADR, all the voices are dubbed for the killer and the victim in interesting ways, which we can talk about. It eventually stops dancing around and zeroes in on one pretty likely suspect, gives him a motive in one scene, and then winds it all up in a standoff where you're not quite sure whether they're going to stab each other or fuck each other.
Correct.
And I think it's trying to implicate Steve in the murder of the neighbor that he gets along with, but I don't quite understand how that tracks because I think he liked him and I don't think he was attracted to him. And he has a very angry lover who was very jealous. So I'm not so sure that I want to pin that on him, no matter how much Karen Allen dresses up in the leather clothes at the end of the movie.
Yeah, my takeaway is we are meant to question whether or not Steve has discovered he is actually queer. Maybe he likes the things that he has discovered while he was working undercover. But yeah, I don't leave the film thinking, oh, he murdered Ted, which is the neighbor, or oh, it wasn't Stuart, the person that we end up killing in the tunnel, and then saying, okay, well, we solved the murders and so on. Like, I think there's enough dangling questions that you could make the argument if you really want to go there. But I think it's actually more fun and maybe curious to read the open ending of the film as, so is Steve a big old homo now?
Yes. Has the lure of the leather and the nightlife slowly turned poor Steve and even his unwitting girlfriend Nancy to the dark side of leather and S&M culture.
Yes.
Which makes it a very conservative reactionary perspective in terms of where this is coming from, which feels right. I mean, this is the era. This is the thing I most enjoyed about the film. It's very much the era of Dirty Harry, of Death Wish, of all of these unmotivated, crazed, possibly queer-coded killers being gunned away by gun-toting, Republican-voting, red-blooded heterosexual men.
Yes.
And the ending of this movie sort of suggests that corrupting influence could corrupt everything. And it sort of explains why this movie's been on a bit of a journey in terms of how it's been received by the queer community.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Like, one of the things that I think is so fascinating about the film is this is a 1980 film of what is clearly a 1970s made film, because as you mentioned, there's a number of titles that it bears a strong resemblance to. But then we get this, we have Dress to Kill, and then we also have, of course, Basic Instinct and Silence of the Lambs as the kind of most iconic queer thrillers that are quote unquote problematic, that have also been reappraised and I think taken back in by queers as, you know what, this film is messy. It had a troubled production, a troubled release. Many of these films were picketed. They were protested when they were in production. And I think in part because they were coming out at a time when queers were really being punished. We were being targeted. We were being maligned. You know, this movie comes out well before the AIDS crisis, but you can kind of feel it creeping in at the margins, knowing that it's going to come in hindsight. So in some ways, this is a very curious title as a Trapped in Amber kind of film. But I think its complexity is what makes it so fascinating. Like, every time I watch this movie, I feel like I take away something new, but also I think I like it more each time.
Well, I enjoyed it from the get-go. Even though I recognized it for what it is and the limitations of what it is, it's very much a film of its period.
Oh, yes.
It's very much William Friedkin takes a fairly simple exploitative genre trope and then turns it into something interesting by layering a whole shit ton of ambiguity over the top of it. And nothing quite beats a film made in the late 70s or early 80s in New York in terms of griminess. It's so grimy.
Yeah, you feel it's very tactile, right? Like, you feel as though you can smell and touch. Like, you finish watching Cruising and you feel like you need to wash your hands because they're probably a little bit sticky. I love it. It's
also a welcome return to humans looking like imperfect humans, because you are so used to waxy, perfect, Botoxed things now, plastic things, to see people with pores and bad shaving and
receding hairlines, bad noses. Like, I mean, I love that in all of the scenes that take place in the bars in this film, almost all of the men that you're seeing are real queer men who volunteered to be extras. So it's like you are getting a glimpse of this unabashed queer joy. And this film, I mean, here's the thing. Spoiler alert for the Patreon piece, if you folks want to keep it on the free side, there's very little queer sex to talk about for the Chili Pepper Award, but there is a lot of sexuality on screen. Like, there's a moment where you practically see someone get fisted on screen in this film.
Yes, and there are jock straps and arseless chaps everywhere. I mean,
so
this
many.
Must have been such a shock to straight people of 1980. Quite the eyeful. And although we don't actually get to see the fisting scene, by all accounts, there is, of course, notoriously 40 minutes of footage missing from this movie, which, at least in part, included lengthy scenes of explicit sexual acts, unsimulated.
Basically pornography. And folks, if you want to not just use your imagination, but try to actually see it on screen. So you'll probably never be able to see Friedkin's version of this because, yes, purportedly United Artists lost it. Questionable. But Sex Pest, notorious sex pest James Franco shot a 40-minute version of this called Interior Leather Bar. So you can watch that if you really want to know. I've seen it. It's exactly what you think it's going to be, only directed by someone that you don't want to think about. So
Yes, which I did also watch, and the only interesting thing I found about it was all of the people who were signing up to participate in it thinking for a moment that they might get a chance to fuck James Franco.
Yeah.
Spoilers, they don't.
No. It's an interesting curiosity of its own, but not essential. Like, you can watch Cruising, get the appeal, and then you can walk away. You don't need to introduce James Franco into the mix.
No, you really don't. No.
Okay, so Conrad, where shall we begin with this film? You know, when you started by saying there's something grimy and dirty about this, like, New York has never felt so alive and so vibrant as the films of this era. And I do love that the film really turns New York into a kind of character. Even in the opening scenes, right? We're fishing body parts out of the Hudson River, as we are apt to do, because it's a New York set film. But it really gives you a sense of place, which I sometimes feel is lacking in contemporary films.
Yes, very much so, because so many contemporary films seem very studio-bound or very green screen bound. This feels very much filmed on location.
Yes.
And also using something that is, you tend to only see in Paul Greengrass movies, where he is mixing non-actors with actors. Paul Greengrass always says that the magic of that is that the actors stop acting and the non-actors start acting, and it sort of levels out somewhere in between. And I think that's true here, because I think the policemen that were acting as technical advisors on the film are in the film, and as you say, the patrons of the leather bars that we see in the movie are the patrons of the leather bar that we are exploring in the movie. And Al Pacino really is just wandering around trying to look like a policeman undercover, and every bit as uncomfortable as his character would be in that situation.
Okay, so I'm interested that you caught on to that as well, because I will say I can't claim it as a weak part of the movie, because in so many ways Steve Burns is meant to be a character that is not comfortable doing what he's doing. Like, especially in the first half of the film, I love the scene where he goes into the sex shop and asks what the hankies are so we can talk about the hanky code. And then the guy says, do you see anything you like, i.e., are you gonna fucking buy something? And Steve just goes, I'll think about it. Like, just deer in the headlights, has no idea. And so much of this feels like Al Pacino maybe not acting. Like, what have I signed up for? And to think that Richard Gere could have been in this film, because that's actually who Friedkin wanted for the role. And I don't exactly know why we didn't end with him, but he wanted someone who was a little bit more androgynous, a little bit soft, because, you know, I think that fits the character. But I do think that Al Pacino has this gruff masculinity, and he looks so uncomfortable in some of these scenes. I think it contributes to the character arc.
I think it does too. I can't believe he took the role, especially in this era. I mean, this just feels like poison for your career and for the box office. It's such an odd choice. It must purely have been the lure of William Friedkin himself that got him to sign on. Yeah. I did giggle, though, and I mentioned this on your Instagram feed, where he says at one point to Ted, I think, the neighbor, that he's just got out of college and he's just looking for what to do next. And I thought, really? Because this 4K edition does not make you look 20, Al. I'm sorry.
He is an older man. He is a mature man.
He is, yeah. He was 39 when the film was shot, 40 when it was released, and he looks it. Not being cruel, it was the 80s. Moisturizer was not a big thing. Botox certainly wasn't. He looks like a 39-year-old man. A perfectly fine and handsome 39-year-old man, but he does not look like a student. Bless him.
I don't know that I would entirely agree with that. I'm not suggesting he looks like a college graduate, but I think he looks pretty good. I would say like early 30s, but yeah. So question for you then, do you like Steve Burns as a character? Do you like what Pacino is doing in the role? Do you think that this performance works? Because in some ways it very much has to anchor the entire film.
Yeah, I'm not terribly convinced by it, I have to admit. As you said, there is always this thing haunting it that you just feel as though Al Pacino is the one that feels the most uncomfortable. And
Yeah.
I'm not sure I completely buy his slow descent into popper huffing, jerky dancing madness.
Oh my God, the dancing is so awkward.
It's awful, yeah. I wasn't completely sold on him being lured to the dark side in this movie,
Okay.
or compelled by his character, which is a shame because Friedkin is so uninterested in the serial killer murder mystery plot. He loses sight of it and then suddenly remembers and then hustles to try and wind it up in the last 10 minutes. It's a little bit disappointing if you're coming to it for that, I would say. So it really is centering on this character, and I'm not sure you're getting an awful lot of nuance from Pacino. He's pretty blank in this, I thought.
Yeah. Yeah, I wanted to read the book that it's based on by Gerald Walker, who apparently was a reporter at the time. And there were real murders of queer men around the time, like in the mid to late 70s. So this was based on facts. And I think, you know, it was a bit salacious. It was a little bit dirty. It was sex selling, but, you know, kind of deviant sexuality. So I can understand why they might have wanted to turn this into a film. But yeah, I agree with you that I don't think the mystery ultimately ends up panning out. Like, it really seems to dominate the initial proceedings. How do we start the story? How do we get Steve Burns on the way? And then it's more an expose of what the queer community is, but also how the police interact with it. And I think that's ultimately where the film is at its most successful, is addressing the fact that there's a lot of police harassment, there's police corruption that we see. You know, even the political pressure, like, oh, we just don't want to have murders, but also we'd prefer to not dip our toes into those queer waters if we didn't have to. So I think all of that's really good. And then in the back half, the movie suddenly remembers, oh, right, we should probably do a couple of red herrings. We should probably do some kind of investigation. And there's still good moments, but it does feel like the film meanders a little bit.
It does, yeah. It comes from that second act where Friedkin really delves into the thing that I think most intrigued him about it, because he read about the actual murders that were happening and then thought that the leather bar culture that was going on was probably the most interesting backdrop for this, and was really most intrigued by the collision of those two things.
Right.
And I think he explores that, and that's probably where the initial criticism and the picketing came from, because it feels as though it's being exploited as a garish freak show that would have scandalized the mainstream movie-going public.
I mean, can you imagine someone in Iowa or, you know, Wisconsin going to see this movie and being like, what the fuck is going on the coast right now? People wear hankies to piss on each other. What are we doing? We used to be a country. What is America? Etc. But
yes, I can imagine that it was quite shocking then. I have to say, it does appear quite quaint now in retrospect, which is probably why that second act drags for us. There's nothing quite so fascinating about it to us now.
Yeah, I'll confess, I've always been intrigued by the protest, because I agree with you. I think in some ways this film is hugely conservative, but I also think that in some ways it's very progressive. It has a little bit of judginess, but not as much as you would expect, and certainly not for 1980. Like, in some ways, this does feel like a bit of a documentary expose kind of feel, and I really respect that. But then I can understand why queer people, particularly at this time and into the early 90s, would say, well, we're barely seeing ourselves on screen. And then you're doing a queer murder thriller where the main character isn't even gay. It's this like straight asshole who comes into the community, poses, beats a bunch of people up, and then stabs some guy and is maybe gay at the end of the film. Like, I do think that sometimes we picketed and protested a little too heavily when we didn't really even know what the films were about, per se. But I don't know. When I watch Cruising, I think it does make its intentions pretty evident. Like, there is a very specific line where we say, this is not all queers. This is a very specific narrow margin of the queer community of people who are interested in leather, a little bit of kink. You know, we're conflating kink and S&M, which is not always right either. But like, no. I don't find this movie offensive personally.
No, I think it's probably, as you mentioned, it's probably the conflation of this environment and murder, as though the two of them inevitably go together. The same thing was, you know, Basic Instinct was tarred with exactly the same brush. Yeah. Finally, you have a bisexual character on screen. Oh, she's an ice pick wielding loony. Thanks very much.
Yeah.
You know, so it's all about, as you say, the depictions are rare and far enough in between, but all we ever get is this suggestion that it is something that is by itself corrupting and will inevitably lead to the most extreme and deviant forms of antisocial behavior.
Right.
So I can understand where it's coming from, but it doesn't necessarily depict any of its queer characters as being evil and depraved, except for the person who is murdering people. Everyone else is presented pretty sympathetically, I think.
Yeah, like there's some not great guys. You know, there's a pretty focal point midway through the film where we target Skip Lee, who is played by Jay Acavone. This is the guy who works in the steak restaurant. And so Al Pacino puts the kind of sting on him where we lure him back to a hotel room and then we question him. We have a large black man who comes in and beats the shit out of him. We'll talk more about that in the Patreon exclusive. But, you know, I think this character is presented as, oh, he's not a very good guy, because we learn he has a discrepancy in his backstory where he maybe got a little violent with somebody. But ultimately what we see of his treatment by the police is way worse than anything that we see him doing to other queer men, either in the clubs or in the bedroom and so on. So I do think the film ultimately sides with the queer community over the corruption and the intolerance of the NYPD.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. The other thing that shocked me, which I think possibly is problematic in terms of the way that the film presents acts of gay sex, did you notice the flash frames in the first murder?
I didn't, but I know that they're there because that's Friedkin introducing pornography, like stills from pornography, into the actual murder, right?
It is. They're not stills. There are 2 or 3 frames of full-on penetration happening in those. And I noticed it. I registered it and stopped and frame by framed it. So I thought, that wasn't a knife going into a body, because it's sort of like the Hitchcock shower scene. Do you see the knife go in? Do you not? Oh no, it's all suggestion. But I caught flash frames that were much more of the Fight Club variety, and I thought to myself, what's going on here? So yeah, I've freeze framed it. And there are two or three frame sequences of a rock hard penis going into an anus in that sequence, and I was very shocked.
Scandalized.
Yes, because that was presumably in the version of the movie that was screened in 1980, which I can't imagine the censors would have been comfortable with if they'd spotted it.
Yeah, which makes you wonder if they actually did, because this movie did have a rocky piece. I mean, that's where the excise footage comes from, as he was told he had to make cuts. But I wonder if part of it is that sneaky, oh, I'll get rid of that stuff and then I'll keep this other stuff, which they won't pay attention to because I got rid of the really egregious thing that they noticed.
Yeah, exactly. It's a cunning technique, isn't it? Because then they watch another version of it and they think, well, this isn't so bad. But the Overton window has been moved so much by what they've seen previously. They don't realize what they've let through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the conflation of gay sex with murder is upsetting, but also... I have made so many reads over the course of my film criticism career. There are multiple times where when you see someone getting murdered, you can consider it an act of sexual aggression. Like, there are so many times where murders equal penetrative death scenes and so on. So to me, this kind of just makes sense. Like, when you see someone stabbing somebody else, a lot of the time the narrative is presenting it as a, oh, well, if I can't fuck you, I guess I'll stab you or I'll kill you.
Yeah. So I'm not necessarily drawing from that it is an anti-gay screed that Friedkin is offering up here. I think it is just very provocative imagery that it intends to achieve a certain effect.
Yeah.
But it is true, though, still in terms of representation, because I remember the very first image of gay sexual intimacy that I ever saw as a young man was a non-consensual act of violence in the movie Scum. And when that's the only representation that you ever get to see. So in this movie, the only penetration you get to see is during a scene of murder. It does lay itself in there as a foundational part of your understanding of queerness, which is not great.
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually less offended by that personally than the fact that we are treated to, I think, no less than 2 or 3 scenes of Steve basically running back to his girlfriend Nancy's apartment so that he can reassert his heterosexuality. Like, and here's the thing, I think that's the purpose of those scenes. Like, I think it's actually very, very deliberate on Friedkin's part, but I still resent it, where I'm just like, okay, well, if you're going to do that, show me him getting his dick sucked in the club, or show me him getting fucked, or something like this. Like, because if not, the film really doesn't have that other side. Like, it's unequal representation.
Yes, and it's especially egregious when it's Karen Allen, who is just adorable. This is full-on Raiders of the Lost Ark Karen Allen in her prime. I was so in love with her in this, and Starman and Scrooged.
Oh,
and
fantastic.
We don't get to see her anywhere other than the bed in this movie being violated by a boyfriend in a really uncaring way. It's quite upsetting. But it does beg the question, how convinced are you by the idea that Steve is slowly turning queer, always has been queer, and is realizing it as a result of his exposure during this undercover operation? Or is it just a foible of an inherent foible of going undercover, that you can lose yourself and become immersed in whatever identity that you're taking on? Are you convinced by that?
I'll confess I'm a bit of a bad gay, because I read the end of this film as he has just been forever changed by what he has seen. Like, he went into this very green-eyed, idealistic, like, I just want to do the thing so I can get my promotion. And then by the end of it, he comes out realizing, oh, I kind of work for a corrupt organization that'll do and say whatever it takes to close a case, often for political purposes. And I've heard a bunch of people in the process still maybe not sure if I even got the right man. So I just see him more through the professional lens, as opposed to the kind of Kinsey scale litmus test that he has undergone. But I mean, I think it's very easy to make a read that there's a reason he's not there fucking his girlfriend in the final scene, you know, and maybe when he comes out of the bathroom and sees her wearing all of the leather gear that he's gotten acclimatized to, it's going to be back to Pound Town. But I love that the movie ends ambiguously enough that you can say, okay, well, maybe it was just a blip. Maybe it was their relationship took a hit while he was undercover. Or it's, no, you know what? I kind of realized that I prefer to spend time with the men in the jockstraps and the leather caps than I do with my girlfriend in her giant palatial apartment.
Yes, I did laugh at that.
Oh my God. I think I would kill someone for that apartment. Just saying.
Yeah.
Okay, but what about you? So maybe we can wrap up here and then we'll move the rest of the discussion over to Patreon. But are you convinced that Steve is queer by the end of this film?
I watched a wonderful YouTube video called This Aged Great. Or is it That Aged Great? It's very good. It's somebody riffing on this movie. And they are convinced that the sting operation that you mentioned earlier, that's intended to capture Skip, is actually our friend Steve trying to get fucked, and he's really annoyed that his colleagues burst in on him because he was just...
finally thought I was gonna get some ass. I finally thought I was gonna get railed, and you guys came in too soon.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm not convinced by that at all. There's nothing about Pacino's performance in this that convinces me of him being anything other than deeply uncomfortable throughout the entire process.
Yeah, and of course, if Wikipedia and gossip is to be believed, he was not given any direction from Friedkin. They they purportedly did not get along very well on set. Friedkin didn't give him a lot of direction in terms of the acting, and it sounds like Pacino was, yes, uncomfortable and maybe a little bit late to work on multiple occasions, but with regard to the ending, Pacino didn't know which way to play it. So I think that lends credence to the ambiguity of it, and maybe that's why people feel like they can project what they want into that final moment. But I think Pacino himself didn't actually know which way to play it.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of ambiguity in this film, which is fun. But,
yeah, I like it.
Yeah.
Okay, well, why don't we talk about some other sexy bits, some other problematic bits, and so on over on Patreon, Conrad. So, folks, if you want to join us, it's $3 a month. We have bonus content for every single episode, and that's over on patreon.com/thequeergaze. You can also, as we said, follow the show at The Queer Gaze. You can shoot us an email at thequeergazeshow@gmail.com. And if you're not going to follow us over to Patreon, we will be back in a couple of weeks to talk about our next cruising title, Conrad. We're going to introduce a little bit of Korean culture into the mix with Andrew On's 2016 film, Spa Night.
Oh, that sounds much cleaner.
Maybe. We'll see.